Alright, welcome back to the second half of Lecture 2. We had left off with swing and accents, and now we're going to delve into melody and scales and modes. And let's just dive right in here. Melody. The easiest way to think about melody is to focus first what you listen to right now. When you're listening to your music, we'll say pop music, if you will, you'll probably be listening to lyrics. And those lyrics that you're listening to is what the singer is singing, is the melodic content of the song, the melody. Okay? Now, with jazz, you're probably not going to find lyrics, but that same concept applies. You're going to have one person playing one line, and that would be the melody of the melodic content of the song. Alright? Now, these melodies, when you listen to it, they're made up of specific groupings of pitch or notes. And when you move from one to the next, they can be close together, like stepwise motion. So if we get our keyboard working here, there we go. Like, say, for instance, if our melody starts on that low C there, okay, and it goes up like this, that's pretty close together, and that's considered stepwise motion. You also find melodies that hop around a little bit wider, something maybe like this. Okay, as you notice, those first two notes there is pretty far apart, so that's not what's called step, that's more of skip. It's skipping some notes in between. So melody can move in either stepwise motion or skipping notes. Shape-wise, you can have various different shapes in a melody. It can be rather flat. Okay, that first part there, notes are pretty close together, so it's pretty flat. Okay, or it can hop around a lot. Okay, so the shape of the melody, relating to whether it's being in steps or skips, can change as well. And then thirdly, melody can have a range of pitches. Okay, like, say, for instance, if we kind of stick with what we've been playing with here, if we consider that our melody, our range of pitches, the lowest note would be that C, and then the highest note would be the A. Alright, so we don't have that much of a distance between those two pitches there, so the range of that little melody isn't that big. Okay, and this may change depending upon the song. Now, when we're discussing pitches, we can kind of think of them as rungs in a ladder. So the more rungs, or the more steps we use, the wider the range of pitch. Okay, so we used a lot of rungs right there. Alright. Now, these rungs that we talk about here, let me go to our next slide, and this might help us out visually here too. Get my keyboard back. Okay, these rungs are divided up with letters. Okay, so we can look at each of these rungs or each of these pitches with a letter name, and you'll find this in Western music. And we use the letters A through G. So right here, we go up our rungs, the ladders here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Alright? If we were to apply that to the keyboard, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Alright? Notice we only have 7 different letters that we can choose from. So we're going to have to obviously repeat because we got more than 7 notes on the piano. Alright? Now, to keep track of how many of these rungs that we use, like I said, we could use more than just those 7. Alright? What we do is we apply a mathematical organizational tool. And by the way, you find a lot of math in music. They kind of cross-pollinate. They share a lot of things together. This mathematical tool is called a scale, all right? And scales are used and can be applied to many forms of music throughout the world, not just Western music. In fact, in Western music, there's even a lot of scales that we can find too. Jazz uses a lot of scales. So, if we take a look at a scale as used in Western music, again, it's based upon a mathematical principle of equal division. All right. An easy example of this would be the concept of an octave. All right. So if we were to look at our example of an octave here, and this is just using the white keys on the piano from C to C, you get a little C4 here and a little C5 here. If we use C to C, okay, notice that they're labeled the same. So that means that they contain the same note name, but one is going to sound higher. And the reason why this occurs is, for the example that we're going to give here, if we were to take, like, say, a 2-foot organ, a tube, and blow air through it, we could get a certain pitch. And let's say, since we're using C to C right now, let's say that 2-foot organ tube sounded this lower C. Now, if we took that tube, cut it in half, so it's now a 1-foot tube, we could label it with the pitch C again, but it would sound twice as high. All right. So in other words, using the mathematical example of cutting something in half, we've doubled the pitch or frequency range of the note. So in other words, now we've got an octave between C and C, and that's how the pitches are set up within Western notation. Okay, so what I was just talking about here with this octave, this would be an example of one of the scales that we use, a major scale. But as we've noticed here, we've only got 8 notes, and there's definitely, if you look at the piano, more than 8 notes between this C and this C. And again, what we do is we apply a mathematical principle where we equally divide out notes within C to C to come up with 12 separate pitches sounding like this. Okay, which again we can visually see in the piano here that we got 12 separate pitches between our C here and our upper C between an octave. All right. Now, between each of these notes are what are called half steps. And if we put 2 half steps together, okay, we call C to D a whole step. Now, the thing to get out of this is scales use a variation of half steps and whole steps and how many different pitches to build different scales. Okay, so if we were to, for example, let's see here, let's just do this. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, like I had mentioned here, major scale, these are the pitches that we talk about. Now, not to go too far into this, so those of you that don't have that strong musical background are going to get lost, which you probably are at this point anyways. What I want you to get out of this little lecture here is that musicians use various scales to create melodies and also to create improvisation. So, for this first scale that is used quite often, it's called a major scale. The notes again are, let me get my keyboard back up here again. Okay, they sound rather happy. Excuse me, happy. And the first note that we use is called the tonic, or the first note of the scale. And in music and in melodies, there are some notes that are more important than others. And an example here is this first note, tonic note, is a very important note when you're building a melody, let's say here, with this being the first note of the scale being used. Because it sounds like it's a sense of being at home or finality when it's being played. So if we do a melody like this, okay, we're building that melody off of that scale, and we ended that little melody on that note. It had a sense of being at home. Okay, so major scale is one scale that can be used. If we look at a couple other scales here, we've got the minor scale. And the thing to get out of this is it's different in the major scale and that it sounds a little sadder. What we've done is we've changed the whole steps and half steps around a little bit. So instead of played like this, okay, we're going to give it a little sadder sound. Notice that we still have 8 notes, but again, we've rearranged our half steps and whole steps to make it sound a little different than the major scale. Okay, so to get out of this, major scale we've used, minor scale is another scale, all right? The third scale here is called the pentatonic scale, and this is kind of an important one because you can find this scale, the pentatonic scale, in almost every form of music in the world, whether it be Asian music, whether it be Indian music, whether it be African music, any kind of music. They start out with building it upon a pentatonic scale. And in this case, it's only made up of 5 notes, all right? So the note choices we're going to do here, instead of starting on C, we're actually going to start with our black keys. So you notice on the piano here, we've got groupings of 3. Okay, if you take a look at the bottom end of that piano there, groupings of 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1 and 2. Okay, so if we played that in order, that would be called a pentatonic scale. Made up of 5 different notes. So now your 3 scale choices you've got would be major, minor, and pentatonic. And we've got one more scale that we're going to look at here, and that is the blues scale. And when I'm bringing this one up, it's not only because of the sound quality, but because blues itself was very influential in jazz music. It did kind of split off into its own genre, but when jazz was being built, blues was introduced by slaves from the interior of the South, and that combined with ragtime, and that's where jazz started to develop from ragtime and blues. So that's why we're kind of taking a look at what the blues scale is all about. Now, with the blues scale, why it was built and how it was built, it was trying to emulate what was happening vocally with songs that you could hear out in the fields, field hollers, I believe is what they're called, and then also what was heard in the church as well. And what they did is they tried to create a scale that sounded, again, like someone singing vocally, like it was bending a note, if you will. So, example here for blues scale would be these notes right here. And notice there's not 8, there's, again, less, kind of like a pentatonic scale where there's not as many notes. But if we take a look at this and play around with it a little bit, we can get a sense of bending notes a little bit. Obviously on a piano you can't really bend notes, you're kind of stuck with fixed pitches. But depending upon the instrument, like say with other wind instruments, you can bend notes a teeny bit like we had talked about in our first lecture. But the whole concept here is with the blues scale, again, it was trying to emulate what was being done vocally with the bending of notes. Okay, and giving different kind of blues coloring of techniques and stuff like that. Alright, so we have talked about the major scale, the minor scale, the pentatonic scale, and the blues scale. And I think, without going too much in depth, I'm going to stop right there as far as talking about scales and modes and things like that, because that's only what I really want you to get out of this. We're not going to sit down and try to build scales here in class. So